Have you ever wanted to be a fly on the wall, listening to a conversation between a Christian and a former Christian, now atheist? If so, tonight you get to, or today, you get to be that fly on the wall as I bring in a guest to do just that. Who's the atheist in the conversation? That is me, the former Christian. I was Bible believing, Jesus worshiping. I guess you could probably go further and put the terms evangelical, somehow, sometimes, somewhat fundamentalist Christian for most of my life, and traveled the entire world. I haven't been to Asia, so I haven't sat down on Africa's continent either, but Australia, Alaska, South America, United States, traveled those parts of the world, promoting and preaching Jesus Christ, the gospel of Jesus Christ, for 30 plus years of my life, and then begin to deconstruct, begin to ask questions of the text and questions of the historic Christian faith that led me away from belief, led me away from worshiping Jesus, led me away from the life and the legacy that I had built up as a Christian rapper, as a Grammy nominated twice Christian rapper. And so that's the trajectory that I've been on, deconverted, deconstructing, which I think is a lifelong process of renewing my mind from having a quote unquote renewed mind. The Bible tells you to do so many things about your thoughts, taking your thoughts captive and making them obedient to Jesus Christ. I've learned the habit of doing that for 3 decades. And that's not something that you undo overnight. And so this podcast is dedicated to me doing that. And not just for myself, it's therapeutic for me, but it's also for others, people who are asking questions, people who are beginning to feel like, hey, the answers that I'm getting, I don't think these answers hold up. And I'm beginning to feel like I'm being gaslit. And so in 2022, I wrote the book, Let There Be Gaslight. In 2024, I put out the second edition in the audiobook of Let There Be Gaslight. And I just spend time having these conversations with Christians of why I do not believe, why I don't think belief in the Bible is warranted. Okay, that being the case, one of the guests who's been on the channel, Stephen, an apologist, we still kick it offline. He was like, hey, would you ever be down to converse with another apologist who's not me? I was like, sure, whoever. I don't. So he was like, yo, I got another guy you should talk to. And so he basically, I was joking around on Facebook saying, Steve went home and got his big brother to come get at me. So this guy who's coming on, Eric Hernandez, is an apologist, an evangelist, and an author. He's got a book, which I would love to talk to him about this book. We're going to have some fun. He said, bro had a gummy. No gummies tonight. I can't, if I fudge something or don't remember something, this is all me. So I can't blame it on the gummies. I got no excuses for any bad performances tonight. But that being the case, let's go ahead and find out more about our guest. Please welcome to ICAPOD, Eric Hernandez. What's going on, Eric?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Chill it. Yeah. So you wrote a book. Let's talk about your book in a second. The book is called The Lazy Approach to Evangelism.
Yeah.
A guide for conversing with unbelievers.
Yes, sir.
So why the lazy approach, and what's that about?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, quite frankly, we'll probably see that in action tonight. Long story short, I think I'll put it like this. There are essentially 2 things that make Christianity true. God exists and Jesus rose from the dead. And if those 2 things are true, Christianity is established. And one of the reasons I call it lazy approach is because it's minimalistic in the sense that, I don't like to chase down rabbit trails and things of that nature. And so you can think of it like a 2-step approach when it comes to apologetics, which I see Paul doing in Acts 17, and I'm sure you may be familiar with, where he establishes God's existence and goes to the resurrection.
Okay. So is it a lazy approach, or do you just think it's the most effective approach? Like what's lazy about it?
The fact that I'm not going to chase down rabbit trails about certain textual views or whether or not evolution is true, I could care less. None of that would affect whether or not there was a God and whether or not Jesus rose from the dead. So that's why I say minimalistic. There's nothing inherently lazy about it. In fact, it takes a bit of ground and legwork to look into what a worldview holds to, what are the implications, and then the lazy approach comes in the conversation.
Okay. All right. So maybe I'll come back. Let me just take a note down. Something you just said I want to come back to. All right. All right. Also, when I was checking out, I just was poking around because I don't know much about where you've been, what you've done. But when I was on your page on social media, you announced that the department that I don't know if you teach for, if you're some department at a school that has an apologetics department that you're affiliated with, they're taking their apologetics department. They're getting rid of their apologetics department.
So yeah, it was Texas Baptist. It's a Baptist convention of Texas.
Okay.
And yeah, they dissolved the department.
And why? Because I would imagine at a time like this, apologetics is needed more than ever. Why are they dismantling the apologetics department?
That's a good question, and it's very interesting to hear that coming from an atheist, and I appreciate that. They just said they were shifting focus, and I'll leave it at that.
You said they were what focus?
Shifting focuses.
Shifting focus. Okay. Okay, all good. So I'm curious. Steve pitched this to me. I just have these conversations because I think it's helpful for people to see and hear them. When Steve pitched this to you, why was this something that you were interested in doing?
So good question. Probably the very first Christian rap album I owned was one of the Cross Movement albums.
Okay.
So I've known of you. I've listened to the music. I loved it. In fact, when I first heard, that you came out as an atheist, I was like, huh? What?
Huh? What?
What? But yeah, so I quite, and I appreciate, and I'm going to be just transparent here and fully honest. Of course, you were at one point a Christian, and I don't deny that. And I would say, because I appreciate what you've done, and quite frankly, my hope is that you would someday repent and come back to Christ. And my hopes are that, after looking at some of the stuff you've said and interviews you've done, is that, hey, maybe I can at least plant a seed or pull a weed, as I like to put it. Plant
a seed or pull a weed. I like it. My man got bars. So you do give me credit with having been a Christian. You wouldn't take that away from me.
No.
So then you're one of the Christians who believe that a Christian can lose their salvation. They can have been saved and then lose their status.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it losing, but yeah, the essential aspect would be apostasy, as you know, what Scripture teaches.
Right.
If we're the bride of Christ, I think divorce is possible. Put it that way.
Wait, say that one more time.
If we're the bride of Christ, I think divorce is possible.
Divorce is possible. Interesting. Okay, all good. I'm very curious because I have different Christians on the show. I'm very curious to know what kind of Christian are you? Like, how would you classify yourself? What are some of your core beliefs as a Christian? That will kind of help me know which kind of believer you are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what specific doctrine, but I'm not a Calvinist. I would lean toward Molinism when it comes to God's omniscience, evangelical.
Can you break Molinism down for people who maybe they don't know what that is?
Yeah, in a nutshell, I like to ask the question that there's lots of, without getting into the weeds, essentially, I would say, like, if you're a Christian, I would say, if God exists, do you think he knows what your life would have been like had you had one more sibling? And if the answer is yes, because he's omniscient, then I ask, did he know this logically prior to creation? If the answer is yes, I would essentially say you're a Molinist. It's the idea that God knows not just what could happen, the possibilities, not just what will happen, foreknowledge, but what would happen given a different set of circumstances, and that's called middle knowledge. In a nutshell, that's Molinism. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you said you do hold to Molinism.
Yeah.
Okay. And what else?
I mean, I could care less about eschatology. I'm a substance dualist. It's as I heard one apologist once say, I'm part of the welcome committee, not the planning committee. So it's just not a topic that interests me too much.
Okay.
But an area of specialization for me is the existence of the soul, which is something I want to get into hopefully tonight.
Sure. Okay.
So substance dualism, what is consciousness, the nature of consciousness, the nature of the
Mm.
self. And so, yeah, so when I read, I picked up your book, Let There Be Gaslight. And as I started to read it, the title hit me differently.
Mm.
And I say this in as much love as possible because I felt like I was being gaslit.
Okay.
I
I've
felt
heard
like
that
the
before.
arguments. Yeah, I'm sure. But hopefully out of love as well, not in a condescending way. But I mean, even like the whole part of the soul, the aspect of the soul. I know you lean a lot into logic, consciousness. I didn't really see arguments against it, and I'm not sure how much you've dove into philosophy of mind or anything like that. But like even starting with just the nature of logic itself, I know it's a nice shirt. I like it. In the Name of Reason, I think that you have that you, as your merch. Is that right?
Yep. In the name of reason. Yep.
In Reason's
Got it right
name,
here.
yeah.
In reason's name. Yeah.
And so, and a few other things even that you said in the book was something like, if you find yourself acting out of line with reality, then it can be said that we're being illogical.
Illogical. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of one of the things to kind of kill a few birds with the one stone. I don't see how knowledge and rationality can be justified if there is no God. And I don't want to jump into it. I want you to take the conversation where you want it. But as I was reading the book, the stuff about consciousness and the soul and the stuff about logic and rationality, that's where I felt I was being gaslit because I just feel like there's no justification for it, if you will, if there is no God.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And just to round out where you are as a Christian,
yeah,
you believe the Bible is the Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
No other holy book has God's word.
Right.
And is the Bible inerrant?
Yeah. I like how Michael Kona states it. The Bible is reliable and trustworthy in all that it teaches and affirms.
In all that it teaches and affirms. Do you allow people to get kind of loosey-goosey with, oh, it's not teaching that. It says that, but it's not teaching that. One of the issues that I have with people who say, who use that definition of inerrancy, it seems like whenever a Christian ends up facing something in the Bible that, okay, we know enough now to know that that's not how reality works, they will say, oh, well, the Bible's not teaching that part. That's just something that was in their worldview. Like, or do you stick with, even when the Bible runs up against something that we know that not to be true, if it seems like the Bible is teaching it, do you hold, like, do you allow your feet to be held to the fire there and say, it says it looks like it's teaching this, and I'm going to stick with this regardless of what reality is saying? Or do you retreat to, well, maybe it's just not teaching that in that case? That way it can still be inerrant.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know the way you're asking it, do I allow it? I mean, at the end of the day, I would say it doesn't even matter what I allow. The question is what is teaching true, right? At the end of the day, truth, I think ontologically speaking, stands before anything. Truth existed before the Bible was written. Mm-hmm. So if there were, hypothetically speaking, an error in the Bible, sure, I'd have to admit there's an error in the Bible. But regardless of the way one defines their view of Scripture, like I said, trustworthy and reliable on what it teaches and affirms, because, you have other people, you have the words of Satan in Scripture, right? So I'm not going to take that as gospel truth, so to speak. It's a narrative. But kind of going back to what I was saying earlier is to even answer these questions, we have to trust that our cognitive faculties, the things we use to reason with, are reliable sources, sources that can even get us to knowledge. And I think that if there's no God, we can't even start there. We can't be justified in any of our beliefs.
All right, we're definitely going to get to that. I guess my question for you is, so let's say there is an issue then of something that the Bible teaches that we discover that's not how the world works. That's not how reality works. Would an untrue teaching in the Bible, would that shake your view of inerrancy, and what would that do to your understanding of the Bible?
I mean, if it was legitimately an error, sure, yeah, it would change my view of inerrancy, absolutely.
And what would that do to your view of the Bible? If the Bible is not inerrant, then what?
Well, then, so to even see whether or not there is an actual error in the scripture, of course, I think if I'm not mistaken, you taught apologetics at a college. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So as you would know, the inerrancy would apply to the autographs, right? Not the manuscripts that we have.
Right.
So can there be errors in the manuscripts that we have that we translate today and later find out, oh, earlier manuscripts show otherwise? Sure. But I wouldn't say that would be an issue with inerrancy. That'd be an issue with textual criticism, as I'm sure you may be familiar with that. So, but to grant to grant your question for the sake of conversation, then sure, it would just mean that I have to change my view of what scripture is and whether or not it is reliable. But, kind of going back to my lazier approach, if you will, none of that would disprove Christianity nor that God exists.
Okay. So, but I think that is saying something, though, because there are people who they could find errors in the Bible and they would just redefine what inerrancy must mean or redefine what it means for the Bible to be trustworthy. They would not say what you just said in terms of it would make you have to think something different about, is the Bible reliable? But to me, I think that's commendable to say, if there was an error in what it teaches, I would then have a question about whether or not the Bible is reliable. That's its own issue, which is separate from what you said after that, which is, but that still would not touch whether or not Christianity is true. The Bible could be unreliable, but Christianity could still be true. That's your position.
Yeah, and tell me if my mic, do I sound better now? Because apparently my mic wasn't plugged in.
It sounds the same to me. I don't know maybe there's a miracle going on over there. If your mic wasn't plugged in.
Here we go. All right.
Yeah.
How's that?
Oh no, now you sound like you're okay. Now it's plugged in.
Excellent. All right.
So I must have been hearing you through the computer speaker before.
Okay, and the question was, I'm sorry, repeat that because I saw that my stuff wasn't plugged in right.
Well, I guess I don't know if it was a question as much as I was just saying. I think
that some Christians would redefine inerrancy, and yeah, there are people even now who don't really like the term inerrancy. I mean, I don't have much of a dog in a Fight. Like I said, Michael Licona wrote a book called "Why Are There Differences in the Gospels," where he addresses this issue, and he says that perhaps we should use a different word. But point being is for what we need to, for example, if there's an error about how many horses King Solomon had, nothing stands or falls on that. If there was a difference, and again with that, setting textual criticism aside of whether or not this or that or the other was believed or written down, my question comes down to, I'll put it like this. I'm sure you've heard of Bart Ehrman, one of the leading non-believing scholars, who's definitely not a Christian, but he's a New Testament scholar. And he says, with all the textual variants we have, not one of them affects any essential doctrine of Christianity. So that's not me saying that. That's Bart Ehrman saying.
Well, he's made several statements about that, and some statements he's made that lean that way. He's made other statements that lean the complete opposite way. There are statements that affect Christian doctrine. Well, he's made those statements.
Well, this is why my good friend Dan Wallace, who's a leading scholar in Greek, when he debated Ehrman, he's debated Ehrman 3 times. He said, will the real Ehrman please stand up? Because Ehrman seems to, in front of an academic crowd, get his ducks in a row. In front of a lay crowd, he seems to be, as you put it earlier, a little bit loosey-goosey with the academic stuff.
Well, see, even in that, though, I think it's interesting because if he can do that, or if he can make these statements, it's interesting because I think Christians will run to him and grab him for comments that he makes that reinforce what they want to say about inerrancy or textual reliability. But when he makes other statements that torch that idea, they would critique him harshly for having those stances when he makes those stances. If he's being inconsistent, then that is an issue. But if it's just a little more complex than saying, I can make one statement at all for all times, especially if you're not claiming to be inerrant yourself. It's one thing when you're claiming to be inerrant, infallible, and standing on a text that's from God. It's another thing when you're journeying through your process, and maybe at one point in your life you did think, oh, these textual issues don't affect Christian doctrine. And then people latch onto that statement and use that against you when 5 years later you think, oh no, the things we're finding out, it does affect Christian doctrine. And they won't allow you to make that statement different than from the one you made earlier. So I don't know if that's what's going on with that, but I have heard him go to bat for his ability to have grown and have a different position later in life than he did earlier in life.
Yeah, well, I was just with him a couple of weeks ago, and not with him like hanging out. He was doing a debate with actually Michael and Conan in Boston,
Mhm.
and I was there in person, and they debated who wrote the Gospels, and nothing that I can recall, so don't quote me
Mhm.
on this, did he mention that any of this affected what was said or what was written, whether or not, even if we know or not who wrote them, nothing's changed by that.
Mm.
But yeah, so yeah, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Kind
good
of,
stuff. Because and all this is us just kind of feeling each other out just to see
sure.
what some of your views are. But I think I understand your Christianity. Jesus's death on the cross was um, propitiation. Was it substitutionary?
Yeah, I mean, I hold a penal substitution. There's some other interesting arguments being made. I just haven't looked deeply into it.
Okay. Another question I have before we dive into anything too deep: hell, literal, eternal, conscious torment, or something else?
Yeah, I hold. So, I mean, so there's essentially three views, right? There's the eternal conscious torment, there's annihilationism, then there's universalism,
Mhm.
where, there's different views on each of those. I hope
Well,
universalism's true. I just don't think it
okay.
is. My second option would be I hope annihilationism's true. I don't think it is. The,
Mhm.
the third option that I hope is the least that is not true, I actually think it is. And that would be the eternal conscious torment.
So, if you hope annihilism,
Annihilationism, yeah.
annihilationism is true, so that people is it so that people are not suffering forever? Like, why do you
Um,
hope it's true?
Well, because I think it sucks to be separated from God for eternity, and that would apply to anyone who's not a Christian, whether they were a Christian or not. And you can fill in the blank there with wherever that applies for you. But
Mm,
yeah, I don't want people to be separated from God. But the fact of the matter is, I think Scripture teaches that people will be separated from God,
mm,
and I appreciate that you use conscious torment, not torture, because according to Scripture, it's not a torture chamber. It seems to be actually a lot self-inflicted torment. The weeping and gnashing of teeth gives this imagery that the person is like shaking their fist at God, even in hell. And I like what C.S. Lewis said that essentially the gates of hell are locked from the inside. Even if people could get out, they want it because why would you want to be around someone you can't stand because you've rebelled against them so much? So
would
I hope annihilation was true because I don't want people to be separated from God and be conscious of that because gosh, I can't think of anything worse than that.
can you help me? Where do you get the weeping and gnashing of teeth paints the picture of someone who's shaking their fist at God? Where do you get that from?
So I don't remember what commentary off the top of my head,
Mhm,
but it's an idiom. It's a phrase. Like if I I don't know, look at you cross-eyed, or if I cut my eyes towards you, those phrases that seem to indicate that there's an emotion behind it. So
mhm.
that weeping and gnashing of teeth is that indication that it's that idiom that you're like shaking your fist at God. It's not like I mean, you look at the parable with Jesus, the rich man and Lazarus. The
Mhm.
rich man does not repent. He's not repent. He doesn't seem remorseful. He's still trying to tell Lazarus what to do, right? Tell him to go dip his finger and put it on my tongue. And then all he wants is that for his brothers not to come here. But there's no, oh my gosh, what did I do? I'm sorry. He still wants
He
nothing
is
to do with God.
suffering though, isn't he?
Oh, I'm sure he is. I'm sure eternity away from God is something that is
No, but
induces
let's
suffering.
let's deal with the text. The text doesn't say anything about I'm distant from God. It's
Hmm.
I'm sorrowful. I feel like God's not pleased with me, and that's hurting my.
That's my point.
He
Yeah.
talks about the heat. He talks about needing relief.
Yep.
That's not something that he's doing to himself. That's something that's being done to him, isn't it?
Right, and without going into whether or not it's literal or a
Mhm.
parable, the point being is my only point is, and you reiterated my point. He's not remorseful. He's not sorry. He's not repenting. He's just trying to tell Lazarus what to do to get relief.
Right. Well, I'm only. I guess the only reason why I brought that up is because you said the gates are locked from the inside. The weeping and gnashing of teeth seems to be us shaking the fist at God. But Jesus used that phrase several times. He talked about being thrown into Gehenna, and the person
Mhm.
who's thrown into Gehenna, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth there. Then he talks about being left outside and not being brought into the banquet, and people who are left outside, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth there.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of that is like I don't get the communication that C.S. Lewis says the gates are locked from the inside.
Yeah.
I guess I'm
And so
just
that'd
curious how
be
you.
That would be a whole other discussion, but I put it to you this way: you look in Scripture, people, even people today who are rebelling. Now, whether or not I can't read anybody's mind, right? So you claim to be a non-believer. I just take your word for it. I don't know what goes on, behind closed doors. I don't know what goes on through your mind when you lay your head down on the pillow at night. But I do know that and know of people who do believe in God and are actively rebelling against Him. You even see this in Scripture, right? So it makes sense to me that if people even now, knowing God's goodness or having once tasted God's goodness, can still be that rebellious, it's not a big stretch of the imagination to see that what's going to change in the afterlife. Not much, I don't think.
Well, I think one thing that will change for people like me, I don't know about anybody else in their unbelief. I don't think I'm rebelling against God whatsoever. I don't think God exists. So it's one thing to say I'm rebelling against God. And if I'm rebelling against God in life, I'll do the same thing in death. So I'll be in hell and God be like, I would let you out if you would ask me. And I'm like, no, I'm still rebelling. The difference between then and now is I don't think God exists now. If I end up in God's hell and I'm like, yo, you're real? Oh my God. Like, I don't think you rebel against the God that you thought was not real, but now you find out He is real. But I do think it's a Christian tactic, two things. One, the C.S. Lewis route to make it seem like, oh, God's not torturing people. I like torment better than torture because to say torture means God's actually doing it. I think Christians have found ways to soften, if not hell, God's part in people being in hell. So he's not really responsible for it. You're doing it to yourself to get to hell a lot from the inside. I think that's a Christian tactic because nobody wants to look at their God as being so just that He's unjust. You're going to have somebody suffering for eternity. No. I can't have my God do that. It's got to be that person's choice that they'll do that.
So let me put it this way. I definitely don't want to soften anything Scripture says. So I have no problem with whatever the text says. I'm just telling you how I understand it. Because put it this way, also from C.S. Lewis, he said, at the end of the day, there's two types of people. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those who God says to them, thy will be done. Now, granted, I'm not claiming that you as a non-believer are rebelling against God you don't believe in. I'm claiming specifically about people. You even look at some of the prophets, some of the people in the Old Testament, even New Testament, who knew of God, claimed to serve Him, but were still rebelling against Him. So if someone who actively believes in God and wants to serve and please Him, and yet they still rebel, then it's not, we can put it that way. It's not a far stretch of the imagination of whether or not people in hell, that's going to make a difference. But like you said, I love where you went. You said, well, you don't believe there is a God. I'd love to get into that and talk about, are there reasons to believe there's a God?
Yeah. Let me make sure that I'm ready to shift gears on that. I guess I think it's worth pointing out though, the idea that people would rebel against God eternally because they were doing that in life. Maybe there are people who really do believe that God is real and they just want to sin, so they're going to do that, and they would do that for eternity. Maybe there are people like that. I want to carve out space for the people who, I think too many Christians are quick to put all unbelievers in the category of, well, the Bible says you're suppressing the knowledge of truth, so you really do believe, you're just rebelling against what you know. And
that's why I haven't said that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll let you stare for a little bit, because I think I know enough now about how you're seeing things. I just wanted to know what type of Christian I was talking to. So yeah, go ahead.
So like kind of, before we started, I kind of gave you showed my card, so to speak, of where in my mind, I mean, well, not just in my mind, it's essentially there are two options: either God does exist or God does not exist. And given that they're mutually exclusive, if you can show that one is false, then the other one by default is true. Like I said, in your book, you lean a lot into the logic in reason's name. So I want to talk about that first. I don't know if you're familiar with Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, or even again C.S. Lewis coming up, C.S. Lewis's argument from reason. But I know in the book you address the question of epistemology, which I appreciate, and even you give the definition that knowledge is essentially a justified true belief. So I like to say, think of it like ingredients in a cake. You need all these three ingredients in order to have this cake. And if you're missing one of these ingredients, there has to be a rational justification. The belief has to be true, and you have to actually believe what you're claiming to believe. If you're missing one of those ingredients, well, then you cannot have knowledge. So with this in mind, I like to start this with an analogy. Suppose you wake up from a nap one day and you look at the clock and you see that the microwave says it's 12 o'clock. So the time is 12 o'clock. You then form the belief that the time is 12 o'clock. But then you notice that it's really hot in the house. You notice there's water under the fridge. And then what could you come to the conclusion? Well, the power must have gone out, right? So now the question becomes, and when you look at the microwave, you notice, oh, it's actually blinking 12 o'clock. So the question becomes, is it 12 o'clock? Well, the answer is, we don't know. It could be, as they say, a broken clock is right twice a day. But here's the point of the analogy. If your belief of the time is based solely on the reading of the microwave, then you now have what's called an undercutting defeater for any belief that you hold to that's based on the reading of the microwave, because you now know the microwave is not a reliable mechanism for obtaining truth. With that in mind, if there's no God, I would say a similar problem arises on atheism, with respect to knowledge and rationality. To be brief, like I said earlier, it has to do with our cognitive faculties. And for the sake of simplicity, I'll just say the reliability of our brain. So if there is no God, would you agree with me? If there is no God, our brains were not designed to obtain truth?
No, not necessarily.
So what designed it?
I mean, there's all kinds of, our brains could have been designed by aliens. We could be assimilation. Like, who knows what, if there is design, it doesn't necessarily have to be a God that designed it.
Okay, fair enough. So at some point, if there's no God, no brain, no cognitive faculties were designed to obtain truth, as far as like whatever the first ones were. Would you agree there?
I don't know that that's the case, because I don't know why brains work the way that they work. If brains work the way that they work, because, and it would probably take a lot to show this, but I'm going to give you the telescope version of it. If what we call brain activity is simply just complex chemical reaction, we don't necessarily need a designer to design the function that we're so impressed with now. We could just be witnessing and be the result of complex chemical reaction.
Right. And so let's just say there's no aliens. It's just human beings. Our brains wouldn't be designed if there's no God.
Well, if you want to stick with the term of being designed, and you remove aliens, you remove a higher species, you remove the simulation idea, you remove all that. Because I don't want to take away from your point, right? But if you look at what's happening right now with AI, the advances in AI, they say we either are there or we're less than a few years away from super intelligence. So if you add quantum computing and super intelligence with AI, like we're getting to a point where AI may be able to think for itself. AI may be able to, for all intents and purposes, do what we call like having self-awareness, right? And sometimes I think to myself, like, man, what if all we are as human beings, what if we are just organic AI of some other species, right? Do you always have to have a backstop for where is this thing going to end? Okay, so you got another species who created us. Do you need another species that created that? What if you're just not able to think at the order of being of a species higher, and the best you can do is come up with a God category? So I'm just saying that to say I leave room for what we just may not have the wherewithal to even imagine at this point. That's the only thing that stops me from going as far as to say, if our brains are designed, they have to be designed by a God. I think that's just a very, I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at what must be the case when we don't know what the case must be. So, not trying to dodge your question. I'm just trying to say, I
That's
think that's a
fair.
very simplistic way of answering the question of what must be the case.
Well, I appreciate you taking it seriously to think through it, but let's put it this way: if there is no designer, there's no design.
True.
Okay.
By
So that would be
definition.
my only point.
By definition.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not what must be the case. Just if we say there's no designer, there's no design. So if there's no God and just sticking to no aliens and everything like that, then our brains are not designed to obtain truth. The second part to that is that if there's no God,
Hold on. I'm sorry.
then,
Real quick. I just
sure.
think it's worth noting to say if there's no designer, there can't be a design. I think that's different than saying if there's no designer, then there can't be a God. Like to import.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that.
Okay. As long as we're not importing God into the designer point, because we don't know who or what the designer can be or could have been.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and my only point here so far is just to establish, like, I this argument assumes, for the sake of conversation, there is no God. So
Okay.
no God, no designer in that sense. Our brains
But
aren't
no,
designed to obtain truth.
but see, that's the thing that I'm saying is not the case. No God does not mean no designer. We
Well,
don't know
and
who the designers could be.
well, but then I think you're just pushing back the goalposts, because there has to be, in other words, if you're going to say there's a designer, right, then obviously then there was something that designed something else. So that's why I'm saying, let's say there's no aliens. The simple point, no designer, call them what you want. If you don't like the word God, fine. No designer, no design. So our brains aren't designed to obtain truth. And then second, if there's no God, then the best explanation we have thus far, and I think you'd agree, you say so in your book, is Darwinian evolution via natural selection. Now, natural selection at best would only aim for survival value, not truth value. So that means that whatever we have, that includes our nails, our teeth, our hands, these are all byproducts of natural selection, which aim for survival value, not truth value. In other words, natural selection doesn't care whether or not your beliefs are true. It merely cares that your beliefs help you to adapt and survive by granting certain behavior. With that in mind, if false beliefs can bring about adaptive behavior, then, to reiterate, your beliefs don't have to be true for natural selection to select whatever kind of brain that you have today. To give you a quick illustration on that, suppose a car's coming towards me and I form the belief that I need to jump out of the way or else I'll die, so I jump out of the way. That belief produces adaptive behavior, therefore I survive. But contrast that with a different set of beliefs where car's coming towards me and I think to I believe I'm Superman, so I don't believe it's going to kill me. However, I want to protect my identity as Clark Kent. So I jump out of the way to appear like I'm a normal human, when in reality, I don't believe I am. Nevertheless, that belief produced behavior that granted survival value. So I say all that to say this. If false set of beliefs could produce this survival value and type of behavior, then natural selection, again, wouldn't care whether or not your beliefs are true. So just as there's an undercutting defeater for the reliability of the microwave that we talked about earlier, that would remove any justification for the validity and truth of any belief based on the microwave, in the same way, if there was no God, then you now have an undercutting defeater for trusting in the rational reliability of any belief your brain produces, which further removes justification for trusting in the validity and truth of any belief your brain produces, including the belief there's no God. So I would say that if you believe that, or if you don't believe that there is a God, and there's only two options, there's either a God, there's not a God, and there's no God, your brain's not designed to obtain truth. And again, we're setting aside aliens. At best, natural selection aims for survival, not truth value. And so you now have an undercutting defeater for any belief your brain produces, including the belief there's no God. One last thing I'll say, and I want to hear your thoughts. Now, remember we said, and even in your book, you say that knowledge is a justified true belief. So if you cannot be justified because of this undercutting defeater, you cannot trust the rational reliability of any belief your brain produces, then you now have removed one of the ingredients for the cake, and you now cannot have knowledge. So the irony here becomes that to even answer the question of whether or not God exists, you have to have rational, reliable cognitive faculties that are not just aiming for survival, but we've established that, well, if there's no design to the brain of it being true. And then now you're in this loop, if you will, to even answer the question whether or not there is a God. You have to be able to trust the beliefs your brain produces. But if you have this undercutting defeater, you can't even believe the beliefs your brain produces, like I said earlier, including the belief that there is no God.
Yeah. There's several parts of this that I would have liked to take and chunk, but I don't have my pen there. I've taken down some of the notes here. Um, we talk about brains being designed versus um, natural selection having brains develop in such a way. It's very likely that rather than brains being designed to, I think you said search for truth value versus search for survival value. Did you use the word search?
Aims. So
Aim,
natural select. Yeah.
right? What I think may be the case is that truth is a survival mechanism. Truth is a survival value. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that the brain was designed to seek truth. The brain developed to help the organisms that we are survive. And truth, or I'll say truth for now, but then I'll come back to that in a second. True things help the organisms that we are survive, even if it's apparently true. If it appears that a car is coming towards me and I need to jump out the way, I could be, maybe I'm farsighted. Maybe I had a lot more time and a lot more room to get out of the way than I thought, but I still moved out of the way of that car. Well, what happens is I train my mind and I train the organism that I am, and I train the species that I am, that I need to react to the things that I'm seeing in order to survive. Now, whether I think I'm Superman or whether I think I just need to get out the way of this car, if I do something that has, in the end, what I'm looking for is not necessarily truth. I think what I'm looking for is something that has predictive power. I think X, I do Y, I get Z. Is Z what I wanted? I wanted to survive, and I survived. Okay, can I repeat this? And can I predict that if I always move out of the way of oncoming cars, I'm going to survive? Like, it's not necessarily truth that I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that has predictive power. And if I'm predicting something and I keep getting the result, but I'm predicting wrong, I thought I was Superman. That's why I didn't. That's why I don't fear cars, but I really wanted to protect my identity as Clark Kent. That's why I moved. I could keep doing that. I could do that ad infinitum if it keeps me alive, until I try to act like Superman in an instance where, okay, I'm going to plunge. Nobody's around. Now I'm going to plunge myself down into the ocean and try to go find me, a unique seashell or whatever I'm looking for. I'm going to go as deep into the ocean with no apparatus, no submarine, because I know I'm Superman. They just don't know that. If I act consistently with that belief and I don't get the same result as when I moved out of the way of the car because I was trying to protect my identity as Clark Kent, if I get a different result, then that idea that I had that I'm Superman, that doesn't really have the predictive power that I thought it was going to have. I predicted if I always act in this way, I'm always going to get this result. If I don't, then something was wrong with my thinking. Even if I got that result when I moved out of the way of the car, if I don't get the same result when I go dive into the ocean, maybe there's something wrong with what I'm telling myself about who I am. And so once again, I think we put premiums on truth, not because there's this capital T truth thing out there, but the premium is, does this have predictive power? If I think this way, am I going to get the results that I want? So it's more of a pragmatic thing than it is a philosophical, we care about truth. I think we care more about pragmatism.
So I care about truth, 100%. I want to know the truth. If Christianity is false, I don't want to be a Christian. I care about truth. I want to know the truth. So a few things is, without going into too deep into what you're saying about Superman, because there's, in other words, I don't want to argue the analogy. I want to stick to the principle, because I've in a similar conversation debate I've had when I brought up this argument, a rebuttal I had was, well, if you think you're Superman, it may give you a sense of arrogance and cockiness, and you're going to go hit on every girl you think, that you see. That increases your chances of survival and reproducing. And if I can quote Patricia Churchland, she's an atheist philosopher. She says, boiled down to the essentials, a nervous system enables an organism to succeed in the 4 F's. So evolution, there's 4 F's to evolution.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, 4 F's to evolution. In other words, evolution cares about 4 F's: fighting, fleeing, feeding, and reproducing. And then she says, truth, whatever it is, definitely takes the hindmost. In other words, and this is an atheist philosopher of science here, Patricia Churchland, uh, natural selection isn't aimed at truth. And I think you're conceding that. Your only point was, well, truth can help us survive. Well, sure. And I'm not saying all your beliefs are false. My only point is it's not aimed at truth. It's aimed, kind of what you're implying, it seems, at what works, which is a pragmatic view. I don't know if you hold to a pragmatic view of truth. I hold to a correspondence theory of truth, that truth is what corresponds with reality.
Well, see, it's interesting because I think, first of all, we have to admit that we don't really have the ability to speak about reality as it is. We can only speak about reality to the degree that we can experience it.
But didn't you just make a statement about reality?
The statement about reality, what do you mean?
Well, you said we don't have the ability to speak about reality as it is. Well, you're
No,
speaking about
we
reality.
We don't have access to reality as it is in terms of the totality of reality. Like there are waves of light that our eyes can't see, that animals in the ocean can see that we can't see, right? There are real things that we don't have access to. And so there are things that we're not factoring in to our understanding of what reality actually is.
But that's different than saying, and maybe, I don't want to misconstrue what you're saying. So let me ask a clarifying question, because that seems different to me than saying we cannot have access to any part of reality. But
no,
I don't know.
We cannot have access to any part of reality. I'm saying we can only have access to the parts of reality that we've developed to be able to experience. So the things that we can naturally experience with our five senses, or whatever we can create to add to our ability to pick up on. So with certain instrumentation, we can see those waves of light that our eyes can't pick up on. You know, there are parts of reality that we can get better at understanding and finding ways to interact with. But there may be parts of reality that we'll never touch on. All we can do is experience what we can experience and find ways to augment our ability to experience those things. And so when we use the word truth, I think we always have to keep in mind that whatever we're calling truth, it's sort of relative to what we're able to experience.
I don't think so. I think I get what you're saying, and I don't want to because I don't think you're a relativist. But going back to what you're saying, I mean, you kind of made my argument, or at least agree with my argument for me, that false beliefs can produce adaptive behavior, and so it's not a factor in necessarily producing the adaptive behavior. You don't need truth for that. And so, that being the case, like I said, it boils down to having this undercutting defeater for any belief your brain produces. So if that removes one of the ingredients for knowledge, then if there's no God, you cannot have knowledge or rationality. And then the irony becomes, if you know that you cannot have knowledge or rationality, or if you know that we can never fully get to the full scope of reality, well, then now you have knowledge, and therefore atheism is false. And if atheism is false, therefore God exists.
No, I don't. Well, several of those points I don't concede. Some of those points I don't follow because when you talk about the idea of without God, you don't have to give me your saying again. I'm trying to remember the way you said it. Without
so
God,
the syllogism, I can put it into, I don't know if that helps, but basically, if there's no God, knowledge and rationality would not exist. But some atheists, let's say like Brady, have used their knowledge and rationality to become atheists. Therefore, knowledge and rationality exists. Therefore, atheism is false. Now, the defense of that obviously would be using the argument I use, Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism. In other words, if there's no God,
hold on. I'm sorry, because what's happening is you're saying so much that I'm losing what I want to respond to.
My fault.
I want to stick with the first point. If there's no God, knowledge and rationality cannot exist or does not exist. What are you saying?
I would say would not exist.
Would not exist. How do you know that?
The argument I just gave. So the formal argument is Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism. C.S. Lewis has a similar argument called the argument from reason. But the simple point is that your brain is essentially a glorified magic 8-ball. I don't grab a magic 8-ball, ask it if it will rain, give it a shake, and if it says yes, I believe it, because I know it's not a mechanism designed to obtain truth. It's entertainment. So if there's no God, your brain's essentially a glorified magic 8-ball, and there's not much of a difference.
But this is one of my issues with Christianity is the way it belittles like humanity in an attempt to carve out room for God. It makes humans and our capacity, our intellect, it makes all of that. It makes it it's almost like the scripture, right? Your righteousness before God is filthy rags. It's like your intellect without God is filthy rags. Like, as opposed to saying without God, our rationality, our knowledge wouldn't be. Like, for all we know, whatever the universe is, however the universe came to be, and there are theories about what the universe is and how the universe came to be and what we're the product of, right? If you look at what's in our world, what's in our bodies, it's the same material that is in stars, right? It's the explosion of stars, it's the disintegration of matter and the reintegration of that matter in these forms that cause us to be what we are. If all of that is true, we don't know why our brains have developed to be able to do what they're able to do. We don't, it's amazing, right?
But that doesn't disagree with what I've said.
No, but here's my point is this. Our brains are doing what they're doing, God or no God. Right? God or no God, our brains are doing what they're doing. So what gives you the ability to say, no God, whatever our brains are doing wouldn't even matter? Like, how do you get there from no God?
Well, so a few things. So it's interesting you said that, I don't know if you said dislike, but that Christianity like belittles humanity. That I would imagine you hate atheism because there's no objective meaning, no objective purpose, no objective morality. There's no purpose or design to it. So if that upsets you about Christianity, which I think is not a correct view of Christianity, then I would say and I'm not trying to be cute here, but I could only imagine then because you say in your book, truth matters, right? You say, and I like how you put it, the truth of the matter is that truth matters. So if it's true that if there's no God, we have no objective inherent value, then it doesn't matter how I feel about it. That's just the truth of the matter, regardless of whether I like it or not. And I've heard, some of your shows, and I appreciate the honesty where you talk about how difficult it was to deconstruct because there was a lot of things you let go of. And I, again, appreciate you being honest there, but I would say, well, the same would apply to atheism. And I'm just saying, I'm granting if there's no God, these are the logical outcomes that our brains aren't designed for truth. It's aimed at survival value at best, not truth value. So this isn't me belittling a no God view. This is just the logical outcome of what happens if there's no God.
But would you agree, even if there is no God, you and I are still having this conversation? True or false?
That would get into a separate argument for God's existence, but I would say if there is no God, nothing would exist.
Okay. I don't necessarily, your view, if there is no God, nothing would exist. Mm-hmm. Something exists, at least it appears to exist, right? For all we know, we could be brains in a vat, but at least the brains in the vat would exist. Something exists. We can agree on that.
Yes.
And the fact that anything exists, that to you is enough to say, and so the thing that must exist for any of these other things to exist, there must be a being who exists first.
As the ontological grounding for everything, and this would get into the argument from contingency. I don't want to switch arguments, but essentially, if anything contingent exists, I would argue that there must be a being that exists necessarily that gives rise to all other contingent things.
A being as opposed to just being. Why a being as opposed to just being?
I'm not sure the difference there.
Being is just the fact of existence. Things exist, something exists. Being takes the fact of existence and almost personifies it. So when you say a being exists, you're not just talking about existence existing, you're talking about someone existing.
I am talking about someone existing, particularly
right.
Three someones.
Right. So my question is, why a being and not just being?
Yeah, I don't know what it would mean to personify existence. But
Jesus said before Abraham was, I am. He's personifying existence in himself. If you take that view of that passage.
No, he's calling himself God. That's the name of God. And
right, but the idea of that name is the one who exists, or the one who will exist. If you take the
The eternal
the
one.
future tense of the term, right? I will be what I will be is what the Yahweh literally translates into. But there's this idea of existence personified. I will be what I will be.
No, I mean, I don't think so. But I could be wrong there. But my point is, if anything contingent exists, it has to be grounded in something necessary. Otherwise, you have what I would say to be an irrational view that you can get something out of nothing. But I do want to go back to the argument, the evolutionary argument. So if our brains, let me just grant what you're saying. If there's no God, our brains are still operating the way they're operating. But again, note how that's not a rebuttal, and I'm not saying you're necessarily trying to rebut my argument, but that
Not yet.
doesn't contradict what I've said. My whole argument concedes starts with the view. Let's say there's no God. Given that there's no God, what are the implications logically of what our brain is? Well, it's not a mechanism designed to obtain truth, and it aims at best for survival, not truth. That being the case, just like the reading of the microwave, if the power goes out, you can't trust the microwave. Think of that and apply it to the brain. The power, quote unquote, has gone out. We now have an undercutting defeater for any belief your brain produces.
But wait, who says the power has gone out just because there is no designer? Because when you say the brain, if there's no God, the brain was not designed to obtain truth. The fact that it wasn't designed to obtain truth does not have any bearing on whether or not it developed to do that thing that it wasn't designed to do, but developed to do.
So if there's no God, there's no what's called teleology. There's no purpose and final cause. So the brain isn't designed or it's not evolving to do anything. There is no objective end goal.
But it doesn't have to be an end goal. If I say it developed to be able to do this, it developed this ability, right? It acquired this ability. It grew to have this ability. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the end goal. That's the present state. This is what it became.
Sure. And so I guess what is the point that you're getting at there? Because maybe I'm not following.
I guess my point is it doesn't have to be designed to do what it's doing. What it's doing can just simply be what it's doing. This almost goes back to the same point about the ground of all being a person versus just being itself. Like for something to be designed, yes, you do have to think teleology. You do have to think it's doing something because it was meant to do it, as opposed to what is it doing? Oh, who knew it was going to do that? But this is what it happens to be doing now. Who knows what it'll be doing in 200 years? If the brain will develop to do something else, not by design, almost by default, almost by, and this gets into issues of determinism versus free will. I don't know if we want to go into all that, but I just think to say if there's no God, the brain was not designed to do X, therefore it's not doing X without a God. I don't know if you can make that leap. Okay.
Right. So I'm not. I'm just saying. So in other words, I don't think it's a controversial point. Even again, Patricia Churchland, atheist philosopher of science, concedes that yes, this is the mechanism isn't aimed to obtain truth. Natural selection at best is aiming survival value, not truth value, and the brain just isn't designed to begin with, right? If there's no, again, setting the aliens aside. So the only simple point is that you have an undercutting defeater for any belief your brain produces. So I guess I should ask, what do you think the brain is doing if there's no God? Why would you trust your cognitive faculties, your brain, and what it produces because, I mean, maybe we kind of should segue into free will because that's part of my argument for the soul. If there's no soul, there's no libertarian free will. And then this creates a similar problem that every belief you have was something you were causally determined to believe, even if that belief was false. So you can never verify your beliefs because even your beliefs about your beliefs are also something you were determined to do and you couldn't believe otherwise.
Yeah. To the question of why trust the brain if it wasn't designed?
Not just that it wasn't designed, that it wasn't designed for truth specifically, and that we know natural selection is aiming for survival value and adaptive behavior, not necessarily truth value. It's not high on the priority list.
Yeah, I don't think that changes what I was thinking. Okay. Why trust the brain if it wasn't designed to aim for truth? I think I go back to what I said a minute ago about predictive power. If you're able to predict what will come of something, if this happens, this will be the result, and you make this prediction, you're not guessing, you're making your prediction based on you've seen this, you've got umpteen thousand examples of when this happens, this is the result. You learn to trust these equations. You learn to trust getting these results from these actions. This allows you to look at the world in a, dare I say, a dependable way, right? You talk about laws of physics or laws of nature. This is how nature operates. I don't know why the law of gravity is what it is. I don't know why the force of gravity is what it is. I don't know why the strong and weak forces are what they are, but they are what they are. And this is what I get into what you talked about in the book with the brain mapping itself onto reality and us being able to call that logical. If I can predict that if I do these things, I get these results, and I predict correctly, then I can know that I'm thinking rightly about the external world. I can know that what's going on internally matches up with the external world. Now, if I'm thinking incorrectly, I might still get results that I like, but it behooves me, for whatever reason, this gets into the maybe even the some of the illogic of life in a nihilistic worldview. Like, if we don't know what the purpose of life is, but we just know we're living it, we don't know why the universe is expanding. It just is expanding. The force of gravity should cause it to contract, but it's expanding. We don't know why. In the same way, we don't know why we have this drive to live, but we're driven. But the fact that I'm driven and I don't know what's driving me, this is where I think Christians often talk about the atheists dancing to the tune of their biology. That could very well be what we are and what we are doing. We're dancing to the tune of our biology.
Dawkins said that, yeah.
Right. But if that's the case, I can't do anything but dance. Like, the music is playing and I'm dancing. My hunger pains come and I'm going to feed myself. And something in here has developed to allow me to find the best ways to do that, to get more energy and to conserve energy. To what end? I'm going to be honest and say, I have no idea why I want to eat again tonight so that I can wake up again tomorrow. And I'm going to eat tomorrow morning so I can, why? I don't know why. I have no idea why we keep on ticking. But as long as I keep on ticking, something in here is giving me goals. It's giving me drives. It's giving me hungers. And it's giving me ways to meet those, to get more energy and to conserve energy. And I think the crazy thing is, let's say you said, okay, there's a God, and the God is the reason why my brain works the way that it works. God designed me to seek truth and to aim for truth and to obtain truth. What if the God who you're trusting is no better than a blinking 12 o'clock on a microwave? What if the God is wrong? Like, how does having a God at the beginning of the process to make knowledge and rationality what it is, how's that any better if you don't know whether or not the God that you're going to is right about it being 12 o'clock? What if your God is a blinking, flashing, he got reset with everything? Like, how do you know whether or not the thing that you're basing logic and rationality and truth on is trustworthy?
Yeah.
And last thing, the thing that I go back to is the predictive power. If our brain's ability to latch on to the external world causes us to be able to make predictions, and those predictions turn out, it's trustworthy. And because it's trustworthy, we're going to call it truth, even if we don't have full access to the panoply of what reality is. We call it trustworthy because we're able to predict. In your worldview, why do you call God at the beginning of your paradigm? Why is that more trustworthy?
Yeah. So a few things. Because it feels like you're making the argument for me again. Because everything you're saying, I say yes and amen. The only thing I would add to that is, yes, you would still have that drive. Something would still be ticking in your brain. Even if all those things and all those beliefs surrounding that were false, that would still be happening. Hence, you have an undercutting defeater for any belief your brain produces. But then your response seems to be that you have predictive power. this is in the argument, in the literature on this argument, the evolutionary argument against naturalism, that's called conditionalizing on R. In other words, you're basically saying this, which is essentially circular. And I know in your book, you talk about wanting to avoid fallacies and be logical. Well, you're essentially saying, I trust my brain because my brain tells me I can trust it. Well, that's not an argument or response to the evolutionary argument against naturalism. You can't just point to the very thing that's in question of whether or not it can be trusted. And you seem to be conceding that you're going to have this drive whether or not the beliefs it produces are true, especially without even going into free will. I mean, the problem's already there. Now, to the question about what if the God that I believe in is untrustworthy? Well, then I'm in the same boat as you are. But my point is simply this.
But do you realize you're in the same boat as me even before that? Because don't you have to trust your brain to figure out which God you're going to serve?
So right. So this is an argument regarding the ontology, so it's an epistemic argument regarding what two things best. What would we need to have for us to have reliable cognitive faculties? On my view, I'm just saying, well, atheism can't be true because I don't want to rehash the argument.
It might land better now that we go ahead.
Okay, yeah, not aimed for truth and aimed at survival value, not truth value, not designed to obtain truth. So false beliefs can produce adaptive behavior. So if that's the case and that removes the ingredient for knowledge, then that means if we do have knowledge, then atheism is false if that is a logical outworking of atheism. So by default, if atheism is false, theism is true, and therefore God exists. That's not my speculation. That's not my wish. That's just the outworking of logic. And in reason's name, we can say that if knowledge and rationality exist, then atheism must be false.
I don't follow you there. But let's go back to the question I was just asking. You do have to trust your brain to determine which God you're going to follow. True?
So I don't think it's the brain that thinks. Is the first thing I'd say. And my point is whether or not I have a defective brain or not, right? I'm pretty sure there's some non-believers in the comment section thinking that is the case, which I love to read, by the way. I get a kick out of the comments. I would just say it's a separate question about whether or not my brain is producing true beliefs. The fundamental question is just at the outset, what has a higher probability of giving a rational, cognitive, reliable faculties? And it's not atheism. It would have to be some form of theism. So if we're just sticking to God or no God, my only point so far has been then on naturalism and given natural selection, evolution, you have it's just simply is the case that you have an undercutting defeater. Because when I say the power's gone out, I'm not saying something has happened. I'm just saying in other words, you're not going to get a magic 8-ball and look to it for advice, even if it gets some things right. And there's no way you can verify. How would you verify that your beliefs are true without using your brain? Well, you're not. You're going to use your brain for everything. So you're stuck in this what's called a dialectical loop that you cannot verify the beliefs you have.
Well, aren't you in that same loop?
Not well. If there is a God, and if atheism is false, then we're not in that. You and I are not in that loop.
But even for you to make comments about a God, right? Mm-hmm. Your brain is formulating these ideas. You're thinking this through rationally. But because you don't want to trust your own rationality, you're outsourcing your brain's ability to think cognitively and correctly. You're outsourcing it, saying the only reason why my brain is able to do this is there must be something outside of my brain that's allowing what's happening inside my brain to be happening. So you're outsourcing what's going on in here, even though what's happening in here is still happening, right? You're still thinking these thoughts.
Yeah. So I'm not, if I understand you correctly, I'm not saying it's because of God that I therefore trust all the beliefs I have. I'm saying it's because that there is a God that has designed our brains to obtain truth, and we have these reliable cognitive faculties. I'm saying at the very least we can begin by knowing and saying that we don't have this mechanism, this what we call a brain that was just guided, that was unguided by natural selection through a blind process. So I'm not sure where, and also I can't help but say, I don't think thoughts happen in here because I'm a dualist, right? I believe there's a soul, so I don't think your brain thinks. But all that to say, I'm not, I don't know what you mean by outsourcing, but I guess if I could ask, do you feel that you freely came to be an atheist?
Not really. No, I think I was presented with certain information, and based on that information, I could only be an atheist.
So are you saying you're determined to be an atheist, like causally determined?
I don't know about well, yes, determined in the sense of I could get more information tomorrow and be a theist, but based on the information that I have now, I'm an atheist. I was a theist based on the information that I had. I think we're slaves to the data that we have access to. And the data that I had access to, now granted, there was more access out there that I could have availed myself to. But having been made aware of certain things, I had to rethink things. And I don't think it was a choice. I think it was if this is what the reality is, then atheism is my natural response to this situation.
But what I'm asking is, do you feel that you were free to analyze the evidence for yourself and that there was nothing in a philosophical sense, a causal determination to do what you did and to research what you did? Well, maybe an analogy might help. Let's say you and I, we can pick someone from the chat and we can put something in there, put a probe in their brain that causes them to think and believe everything we want them to think and believe. So let's say they come to believe in Buddhism, and then we make them think that they have rational reasons for believing in Buddhism. You and I, from the outside, could look at this person and say they're not rational, but we're making them think they're rational. So I'm just applying that same principle to your brain. If there's no God, no soul, then all your beliefs are causally determined by the neurons and synapses happening and going on in your brain. And you could not have believed otherwise, even if your belief was false. So that adds another layer to the logic and rationality, that if you cannot get outside your brain that is determined by the laws of physics and chemistry, you once again cannot verify any belief you have.
Well, let me answer your question first. I think that pretty much sums up my view. I would have to think about it a little more, but I don't think that invalidates the views that I have. But once again, I think if we're going for what's pragmatic, and I don't want to say pragmatic at the expense of truth, I think truth is the most pragmatic thing. But I think our access to that is limited to our ability to get the data, to get the right information about the world that we live in. I think that's just a fact of reality, that we're limited. We are, once again, we're slaves to whatever the data that's available to us. And so if what I am right now in terms of how I see the world and how I see God and how I see atheism, if that is simply the byproduct of what the content of my mind has been able to process, did I come to that decision freely as I could? But I don't think there's anything that's not determined by other factors. So I don't know what ratio of free will versus determinism. I don't know how I would split that hair.
But then you realize then that you can no longer, back to my point, you can no longer justify and verify your beliefs because you're determined to believe what you do, and you're determined to believe that your beliefs are rationally justified.
Well, once again, I don't know where to draw the line in terms of where determinism and where free will actually come into play. All I will say is I think all of us are in the same boat of trying to make the best of whatever the data is. This is why I think science is so important.
Can I ask real quick, are you an empiricist? Because I'm starting to get those vibes, but I don't want to mischaracterize.
Well, I don't know if I could fully say that. I am an empiricist, but I think empiricism, I think rationalism, I think all of those are means by which we're trying to get what's out here in here. We're trying to get what's in here to match what's out there. I don't think you can do that without empiricism. I don't think you can do it without rationalism. I think you need both.
But are you aware that empiricism is a view that knowledge is attainable only through the senses?
Well, that's why I said I can't stay strictly there.
Okay,
because
then
I think you need the empirical, but without the rational, The rational has nothing to work on without the empirical, and the
So
empirical
then,
is nothing without the rational. You need them
so
both.
yeah, and so because I guess I would, and I'm not telling you what to call yourself by any means, but I wouldn't
Mm.
call myself an empiricist if you think that you can have knowledge beyond the senses, because empiricism is going to limit you to only the senses. And if you're saying we need more than that, well, then we would have the same epistemic view, at least on that front, because I think empiricism is self-defeating, right? To say that knowledge is only attainable through the senses, that very statement that you can only get knowledge through the senses is itself not something you can get through the senses. That's a philosophical view, belief, not an empirical view or belief. But I had interrupted you. You said that's why science was so important. Where were you going with that?
Yeah. I think the scientific method is important because it is one of our best tools to find out what's reliable. And once again, I go back to predictive power. I think what we really want is reliability. When we use words like truth, all we're really talking about is that reliable?
I'm
And so,
not.
well, so when you talk about truth, what are you talking about?
Objective truth that's independent of human thought or opinion.
But if it's independent of human thought or opinion, how would you ever have access to it? Because you are a human and everything that you think is true is based on your thoughts and opinions. So how would you ever have access to your definition of truth?
But note, I'm saying you're asking what truth is, not how I access truth. So, in other
Okay.
words, if every human on the planet right now died, it would still be true that the color blue is darker than yellow. That's an objective truth that's independent of whether or not people acknowledge it, realize it, or know it. So, objective truth, standard definition would be just a truth that is independent of any acknowledgement, any consensus, independently of human thought or opinion is how I like to put it, versus subjective truth that's going to be dependent on you. So I guess, do you affirm that there is objective truth?
I affirm that there are true things, right? There are true things, but I don't know that our ability to get at those true things is ever going to be objective. I don't know that we're ever going to have access to objective truth. I think all truth is going to be subjective. All truth is going to be your ability to access that information, access that data, to assess it, to process it, to understand it. So there may be true things that we will never know.
But you do realize that, though, that what you just said is self-defeating. If you say that all truth is going to be subjective, well,
Mhm.
you're making an objective statement about reality. So then that statement itself either is subjective or it is objective. If it's objectively true, then all truth isn't subjective by default.
Well, I think when I say that with the caveat that for us,
Okay.
for the kind of beings that we are, I don't see how we're going to ever have access to truth that is outside of or independent of our ability to get at it. We are the kind of beings that we are. We're never going to have access to a truth that's not dependent on our ability to access or understand it. So it's going to be subjective no matter how you slice it. The
But I think, go ahead.
Well, guys, I'm just saying, whatever the objective truth is, it's going to be subjective by the time it gets to us.
I'm not sure what that means, but because it sounded like you were doing it again earlier. Because no matter how you slice it, if you're going to say that truth is subjective when it comes to us, you're making an objective truth claim about what truth does when it comes to us.
I'm not making
So,
an objective truth claim as much as I'm stating our limitations.
but are those objective limitations?
Are they objective limitations? There are limitations that I don't see us getting around. That's all I can, that's the most I can say about them. I think a lot of times Christians want to put the flag in the ground for I have access to objective truth,
I
but
think we do.
you could never know that. You're a
Why not?
subject. How are you ever going to have access to something that's objective when you're a subject yourself?
So two things. One, so I can't help but point out that the reason I point out the self-defeating statement is because that to me is proof that that can't be true. Because if you say that we can't get objective truth, you're making an objective truth claim that would have to be objectively true for it to apply to every human being. Yes, I am a subject, but I think you're confusing the ontology, whether or not there is objective truth, whether or not that exists, versus whether or not we can know objective truth.
No,
And
I'm not confusing them. I'm saying there are objectively true things, or at least there appear to be. There appear to be. Once again, I don't think we can speak on objectivity. There appear to be objectively true things. And I think our only access to whatever those objectively true things are, it's going to be subjective. I don't see any way around that. So that's not me making an objective claim. That's me saying, here's what I think our limitations are. If you want to show me how we are not constrained by that limitation, how we can actually have access to objective truth, I'm all for it. But I don't see how we get around all truth claims being subjective to some degree.
So let me touch on that, because I think without realizing it, you're still making objective truth claims. Because do you think we could ever have access to objective truth?
To varying degrees, based on the subjective nature of our knowledge, I don't know that we can. I don't know how we could, is what I'm saying. That's not an objective claim about truth. I'm saying I don't know how we ever could.
Would that be true even if you did not exist?
From what I know about the human condition, I think that's a true thing about the human condition.
And all I'm saying is, if that's true, it would be objectively true. But let me go to the sub. You're saying, so yes, I am a subject, but me being a subject doesn't make everything I say or believe subjective. That there's a difference there. That's why I said it sounded like, at least to me, that you were confusing the ontology here. The number 2 is even. That is objectively true, independent of whether or not any human being exists. The number 2 is going to be even. Now, when I come to believe that the number 2 is even, and I say it out loud, it doesn't become subjective just because I, a conscious subject, conveys that truth. It is still an objective truth. It's just now believed by a subject, but that doesn't make it subjective.
But what you've done, though, is I think you've slipped in a human convention as an objective truth. When we call something an even number, that's a convention that we use as human beings to make sense of, I've got this thing and this thing. How many things is that? And is that an even number? We've created what an even number is. That's a human convention. That's not an objective truth about reality.
So I think it is. I don't think it's a human convention. There's truth that we discover, we don't invent. But let me just go to math. 2 + 2 = 4. I hope we could agree that that is objectively true, even if no one existed.
I would go as far as to say, that is our experience of the world. It's trust. That seems to be a trustworthy statement about our experience of the world. Is that subjective? Yes. Is that objective? As far as we can tell, that's an objective thing. But I guess all I'm doing is I'm trying to be true to what I think is our reality, which is all we know is our experience of the world, and that is a limited experience. And I think we have conventionally even language is a convention. It's us trying to make sense of the world as we experience it.
But I know, especially if you've taught apologetics, this is why I feel the "Let There Be Gaslight" title hit different, because I know that 2 + 2 = 4. Sure, are there limitations? Yes, but no one's arguing there aren't limitations. There is objective truth out there. Whether or not we can know it, again, separate question. But I think there's many. For example, I exist. That is objectively true, and I cannot be wrong about that, even from any. I hope you're not going to say that I could be wrong that I exist, but I'm curious.
We could be someone's dream right now. You would, if you exist, you could exist as a figure in a dream. So when you say I exist and I know that's objectively true, do you objectively know that you're not in someone's dream?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Well, one, I have no evidence for it because right now you're just playing skepticism. That's a
No, I'm
questions
just
like that are dime a dozen. There's one thing to be skeptic. I build my life off evidence, logic, and reason. If I have no evidence, logic, or reason to back it up, I can't
Mhm.
live my life off of but what if. I need evidence to back it up. And
Do
this
you
is why,
know that the past is real?
yes.
How do you know that?
So there's a view in epistemology called phenomenological conservatism, and it simply means I am justified in my beliefs until I have reason to believe otherwise. I haven't heard an argument that the past is not real. That you can be
Oh,
skeptical
you've
about it.
you've you've said the same thing that I just said. You cannot be definite about it, but what you can do is based on the evidence that you have, this is the conclusion that you can come to.
So I think I might be picking up on something that I do want to touch in a second. But going back to the whole, do I exist? If I doubt my existence, who's doubting? Me. This is why Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Because if I begin to doubt that I exist, that means I'm thinking. But I cannot think if I don't exist. So if I doubt my existence, I'm thinking. And if I'm thinking, therefore I am. So you cannot. So to doubt your existence, you have to exist. Could we be a dream in someone else's? I mean, I would love to hear an argument for it. But it's that what I wanted to get at was, and I'll just say this last point. I want to throw it to you.
Mm.
You sound that you're just espousing skepticism, which
Well, I think
holds
skepticism is useful in these conversations, so I am
not
for what
epistemic
it's useful for.
skepticism. I think epistemic skepticism is self-defeating as well, because if you're gonna, and again, I don't want to straw man you, so this is me asking clarifying questions. Do you believe that knowledge requires certainty? Because I don't, and it sounds like you do, which is a key feature of skepticism.
No, I don't think. Well, justified true belief,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think is certainty. I think once
I
again,
agree.
I think everything that I'm saying it comes with the caveat of this is us trying to do the best that we can do with the equipment that we have and the data that we have. And so when we talk about knowledge of the truth, even that is a statement that has to be measured with I'm doing the best I can do to get at truth with the equipment and the data that I have. And I have to be humble and I have to have the humility to say, but I may not have all the best data and I may not have all the best equipment. Therefore, I have to be very slow to call what I'm talking about as truth. I can say this is reliable. I can say this is dependable. I can say that this is repeatable. I can say that this has predictive power. And based on our common senses, I can say 2 + 2 is 4, and that's true. I don't know if I can say that that's objective. All I can say is based on the equipment that we have and the data that we have, this is the best that we can do. And I think that's what we do when we do math. That's what we do when we do logic.
It sounds like you're saying is I could be wrong, which is another key feature of skepticism. Sure, you could be wrong. That doesn't mean you don't have knowledge. It doesn't mean you don't have truth. I don't think truth requires certainty. And so, and it is wild to me and this is, and I have atheist friends and good friends of mine, love them, but I think it's wild when we start talking about whether or not we know that 2 + 2 = 4 is objective. I don't think there needs to be a caveat. There are certain truths that are a priori, and I think you talk about this in your book. So you're familiar with this, that there are truths, if they're a priori, especially if they're self-evident. I believe there are self-evident truths like the fact that I exist. I cannot be wrong. These are incorrigible beliefs that I have that I can't be wrong about, because to be wrong about, like, again, me existing, I would have to exist in order to doubt my existence. So there are some things that are just
I don't think
self-evident
that's
with me.
true. I think if you're somebody's dream, you could think that you're doing the doubting,
But
but
okay,
you're not doing the doubting.
but I want to
Those
correct the language here,
feelings,
though.
I'm sorry, if you're in a dream and you let's say you push somebody in front of a car in a dream and that person gets hit. Does the person in the dream think they got hit? Or are they not thinking at all? Or are they
There
just
is no person,
there's no person. But
right?
in that dream, when you feel those feelings in that dream and you think you have like you're running from the cops because of what you just did that really just happen?
But here's, and maybe so when you say you're using language that
Mhm.
contradicts what you're saying. If there's a you, if there's a self, then I exist. But if I'm a figment of someone else's dream, I don't exist. There is
No, no,
no
no, no.
I
That's
in
not
that
true. You
situation.
exist as a figment. Does Harry
no,
Potter exist? Does
there
Harry
is no
Potter
you.
exist? Does
No.
Harry Potter exist?
No.
But you know who I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
So he does exist as a
Is he?
character.
Well, the concept of him exists, but he doesn't exist.
The character Harry Potter exists. It's a concept, and the concept is a character.
Is there a real person that exists in from this novel that we're talking about that exists in reality?
So far as we know, no.
Right. So then they wouldn't. So then there is no Harry Potter. There is a concept of him. Same thing with a dream. When I have a dream of other, like, let's say tonight, I have a dream that you dropped to your knees and gave your life to the Lord. Well, I know that wasn't really you because that's me thinking of you. There is no you there. You're still at your house. I'm at my house. It's not you. So you're not doing any thinking in that dream. I am dreaming about you thinking, but that doesn't mean there's a you in there thinking.
I get that. All I'm saying is, for all we know, with all of our experiences, we believe that this is reality, that this is real, that you and I are having this conversation, and we're not. Well, actually, you do think we're in someone's dream right now. You just think that the dreamer is God.
I don't.
Where are we right now? Where are we somewhere right now? Where are we?
Earth? I'm not sure.
And
I'm not sure.
Where is Earth?
Somewhere in this galaxy and Milky Way, and this
And
universe is expanding.
where is the galaxy?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to
It's in
answer
the
that.
universe, right? It's in the universe. Yeah. Where is the universe?
In all of space.
Space is the universe expanding, but where is that at?
Well, I don't think there is a where. It just is here. It's the whole thing all together. It's an aggregate, if you will. There's not one thing I can point to and say that's the universe.
So the universe is everywhere there is to be, correct?
Physically. So this, and I'm glad you said that because it reminded me, you were talking earlier about science being the best tool we have. It's the best tool we have for the physical world. But if God exists, by definition, he's not physical. So you cannot use something like science, which is limited to the physical, to try and investigate the non-physical, because then you're essentially asking me to measure my weight by using a ruler. It's just a wrong tool for the assessment. So science is a wonderful tool for the physical world, but if we're talking about souls, consciousness, God, these are non-physical entities, and it would become a category fallacy to try and press empiricism or science onto something that is in a different category that isn't physical to begin with. So space, the universe, is everywhere that there is physical location, but I'm not sure where you were trying to go there.
Well, I guess all I was trying to go with that, because you just said some more things that it's already an hour and a half. I would love to dive into, but that's a whole other discussion. Where I was trying to go with that is I've heard Christians say that the universe, that everything that exists as far as we know to be the real world, all of this is taking place in the mind of God. Whatever the mind of God is, this is happening there. You would not agree with that? Okay.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. What did you just say? I don't even know if we have time to go into
about the empiricism and basically what's called scientism, that these tools don't apply to investigating the supernatural.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So when I was talking about science being the best method that we have, it wasn't the best method that we have when it comes to dealing with God or spirits or anything like that. I was making that statement to say science is the best method that we have to determine what's reliable, what's repeatable, what's predictable. The scientific method is the best method that we have to determine those things. Give me another method.
Logic and philosophy.
You use logic to do science, don't you?
Right. So yeah. So philosophy comes prior to science. So the best thing we have is actually philosophy. You cannot do science. Kind of like what you just said. You cannot do science without philosophy. So there are certain philosophical assumptions. There's a really good book, Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. J.P. Morley and William Lane Craig, awesome dudes. They list, I think, at least 10 philosophical presuppositions of science that that you need to assume before you can even do science. Another quick shameless plug. I quote them in my book and unpack it a little bit there. But yeah, I mean, there's right. You use philosophy to do science. So science in and of itself doesn't stand on its own. Philosophy is a foundation of science, and nothing can be more stronger or more foundational than the foundation that stands on itself, which is philosophy.
That would be a whole other discussion. I think philosophy was at one time the queen of the sciences, right?
I mean, I think it still is.
You think it still is? I had a feeling. That's a whole discussion. I think in today's world, Christians have largely bum rushed philosophy as an attempt to almost legitimize theology. But I think say again.
I was going to say, or theology is true because God exists, and philosophy naturally goes hand in hand because it maps onto reality. Because convenience isn't an argument against the view. Convenience would help a view. Because if you say, well, that's convenient, you did, well, yeah, if it's true, we would expect that. So now you have explanatory power as well on the check for theism side.
All right. So this whole discussion really has just been us, I think, kind of poking and prodding at each other's ideas just about how are you, like, this was almost a conversation about epistemology, whether this, like, we didn't get into any conversation about whether or not there is a God, just whether or not you could have logic without God, you could have reason without God. And we kind of just danced around those issues because we could drill down on several of these points, but it's been an hour and 38 minutes. Is there anything that you feel like would help get us to if we haven't gotten to the meat of the conversation? Because I feel like I've just been trying to tease out ideas so far. Anything that you feel like? Go ahead.
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I think we did get to so the argument, and I know it's kind of it was dispersed, and I don't mind because, like you said, there's a dialogue, and I've enjoyed it very much. By the way, I appreciate this. I mean, the argument was essentially, if there's no God, logic and rationality can exist, because we briefly touched on free will. We can talk about that another time and throw the soul in there. We talked about whether or not the brain's designed to obtain truth, and I said the brain's a glorified magic 8-ball if there's no God. So if that ingredient of justification is removed, then you cannot have knowledge. Therefore, we could put this in a syllogism and say, if there's no God, no knowledge and rationality. But Brady has used his knowledge and rationality to become an atheist, which means knowledge and rationality is possible. Therefore, atheism is false. And if atheism is false, God exists. And that's just me summarizing what we said, but just to point out that was my segue into getting to whether or not God exists by, if atheism is false, theism must be true.
Yeah, and I get you. I appreciate you restating that with the syllogism. I think what we're calling knowledge and rationalism, I think it could very well be a byproduct of, like I said, very complex chemical reaction. I don't know what we are. I don't know why we are the way that we are. I don't know why cows are the way that they are, trees are the way that they are. I think I'm sure you could. I would highly disagree that those are the reasons why. That'll be the next time we talk. We can go into the specifics of that. But I do think what we're doing when we reason, I think our brains have a vested interest in allowing our organisms to do the best job possible at navigating the external world. There's an internal world, and we're trying to find out how to navigate that. And I don't know why we do the things that we do. That's one of the things that I'm quick to say about my worldview is I don't know why we do the things that we do. But I definitely don't think that the theist's explanation for why we do the things that we do makes the situation any better. As a matter of fact, I think it makes it more convoluted. And hopefully we'll get a chance to come back and talk about why theism, for me, only complicates what's already complicated. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, so when you say theism makes it more convoluted, I just want to say this, and then I'll throw it back to you. But granted, though, in this discussion, The atheist in discussion has said we don't know if the number 2 is even. It's a convention. That we don't know if 2 plus 2 equals 4. That
No, it's not
no
that. I
union.
didn't say we don't know if 2 is even. I'm saying
We said it's a convention. Right.
calling it even is a convention.
That
Yes.
we can doubt whether or not we exist because we can be in someone else's dream. I don't see how you don't see that as convoluted. This to me is where I for the most part, you seem to be a rational thinker, but then we come to these questions that are so basic, and it seems like, and I don't want to psychoanalyze. That's why I just say I just want to throw this out there, and yet it seems like you're going through these loops to deny these basic fundamental truths.
Well, the only
And
reason
that,
why I'm going through those loops and to those lengths is not to deny those fundamental truths. It's to challenge your certainty of them. Because it's not that I don't it's not that I think I'm not real. I think I am real. But it's the certainty with which you're stating these things, and particularly the reason why you're stating that you could be so certain, having to go outside of your mind to a God to ground it. That's the only reason that's making me challenge the statements that you're making. Had you not held the view so strongly that you could be certain and objective about these things, I would, amen. Yes, 2 plus 2 is 4, and yes, I'm alive. And this, but it's the certainty of the idea that there's these objective truths that I don't think you could actually ground. That's what's making me go to those lengths.
and I just say to even say that there's no certainty to these objective truths is an objective truth statement. And so it's not a certain, and I would just say certainty is not a requirement for knowledge. I don't hold to that. So whether I'm certain or not is irrelevant as to whether or not it's true and whether or not we can know it. So I don't need certainty to have truth and to have knowledge. So to say you could be wrong, sure, that's just skepticism, unmitigated skepticism, because you could be wrong about the fact that I could be wrong, and then we're back to the same problem. So whether or not we're certain, I think is just completely irrelevant. I think the question is, what is most rational to believe? What is logically consistent? Where does the evidence point? And I think it clearly points to objective truth, and I think objective truth is grounded in God, and it points to the fact that God exists.
Yeah. We'll leave it there for now. I think I saw a few super chats, and we can come back. This is just part one. We can come back and do a part two if you're willing, where we can actually drill down on some of these issues. But let me go up and see some of these super chats. I saw.
While you're reading that, I'm gonna step out really quick.
Okay. I saw this one was just a super sticker. Thank you from Al Benson. Thank you for the super sticker. If you have another comment, I'll look forward to see if you're saying anything else. Appreciate the $1.99 super sticker. I also saw David DeBoe. Thank you for the $5 super chat. Said, thanks, Eric, and be good for the discussion. No doubt. I shall win. Thank you for the $5 super chat. This is a great discussion. Thank you. Thank you for the super chat. Is that the last? All right. Yeah. So talk to us in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking so far. Like I said, this is hopefully part one of another one. I try to not go too in depth in these discussions, especially on the first one. I sort of just want to see where my guest is and sort of lay out what my position would be on some of the comments. But let us know your thoughts, and we will keep it going. Eric's book. Let me drop the link real quick. Where was it at? It's right here. Eric's book is, the link is in the chat, and I'll put it under the description of the video. The Lazy Approach to Evangelism. So do you feel like that you took the lazy approach today, or were you a little more?
Yeah, I think I did.
Okay.
And if you want a copy, I'd love to send you one.
You have I don't do physical books, even though I have mine behind me. Do you have, is there a digital version?
I can send you a PDF. Absolutely.
Okay. That's what's up. And thank you for copying Gaslight and for going through it to the degree that you did. I appreciate you being prepared to know what some of my views were. Let's do this again, man. Let's do this again soon, so we don't lose where the conversation was. But seems like folks enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed it. Any last words?
No, I very much enjoyed it, and I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate what you've done. Like I said, first rap album I own, first Christian rap album, and
That's what's up.
I do have a request, and I don't know how this is going to
Okay.
go, so I'm shooting from the hip here. Would you mind? And if you say no, it's perfectly fine. It's your show. If I prayed us out before we got off.
I kind of would. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, no worries.
But yeah, have at it in your prayer closet. Do your do, and we'll get back on it next time. All right, y'all. Much love. Thanks for coming through and rocking with the channel. Peace.